By definition, the paleolimnology is the study of lake development through the analysis of physical, chemical, biological information stored in aquatic sediments to infer past changes in environmental conditions and water quality. It is the study of past freshwater and subsaline environments. The paleolimnology approach has become increasingly useful in the last few decades because the techniques involved have been improved and refined to a degree at which they can be useful to fill the gap of non-existent historic records and development of aquatic ecosystems. Information on historic conditions of a lake can be inferred from fossils, geological, and chemical signals contained in the sediments of aquatic ecosystems. Data collected is used for the reconstruction of lake chemistry and biology. The science involves extracting information on the historic conditions of an aquatic ecosystem via proxies contained in sediments. This is true because over the course of time, ecosystems are altered in a number of ways by natural events and anthropogenic activities. Records of these alterations are held in sediments as they have been accumulating since the moment the system was created. Therefore, they provide a collection of all major changes the ecosystem has undergone. So, indicator analysis. These are necessary to understand due to the fact that we are comparing species diversity and compositions among diatoms before and after industrialization. Different indicators will provide different information of past environmental conditions. Therefore, most paleolimnologists use multiple indicators as an advantage to provide a more holistic reconstruction of exactly what types of activities were practiced at the location historically. Sediment records contain many environmental indicators from a variety of sources. Indicators are also commonly referred to as environmental proxies and include physical proxies, which are organic, mineral content, magnetism, grain size, and general physical properties of the sediment. Chemical proxies, which are pollutants such as metals and persistent organic contaminants. Isotopic proxies, which are radioisotopes of lead, cesium, carbon, stable isotopes of carbon, such as nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. And biological proxies, which are pollen, macrofossils, cyanobacteria, algae, invertebrates, remains of plant pigments, and diatoms. So specifically, we're looking at biological indicators. So those include diatoms that are unicellular, and their distinguishing features are a cell wall made of silicon dioxide. Frucitil is composed of two valves, which fit together with the help of a set of griddle bands, and the taxonomy of diatoms is based on the shape and structure of these silicate valves. They're the most widely used group of indicators for research, due to the fact that silicillous cell walls are resistant to dissolution and breakage. Taxonomy is well defined, and the size, shape, and sculpturing of these valves are taxon specific, making them easily identifiable using microscopic techniques. Many species have well-defined environments, optima, and tolerances, and they're present in almost all aquatic environments. And also fossil assemblage in lakes are often abundant and diverse. Okay, so when applying relevance to practical application to the paleolimnology approach, it can be used to provide an approximation of water quality at certain times or intervals in the past, and how the ecosystem developed over that period. By using the information, sudden changes in present water quality can be linked to known events that have probably affected the aquatic ecosystem. For example, natural catastrophic events and certain anthropogenic activities. The effects of prehistoric humans, or the impact prehistoric humans have already had, is also discussed throughout the paper, which is critical to understand when determining the magnitude of recent changes in aquatic systems following human activities. For example, paleolimnology studies have shown that atmospheric pollution from agriculture in midland Europe began as early as 4,500 years ago. It altered the Swedish lake systems to the current conditions that are seen today. Also, mining and smelting activities in Europe and South America approximately 1,000 years ago were recorded in distant lakes. So, sediment accumulation. With this knowledge of the past, lake management can be adapted and customized to prevent significant worsening of water quality and the causes of them. Furthermore, long-term planning can be built upon knowledge of past development. The nature of sediment records in the bottom of the lake and how sediments accumulate over time is the key topic to understand due to the fact that it assists in explaining how the arrangement of the depth of sediment layers actually show the environmental changes over time. Climate and regional geology control which materials lay on the bottom of the lake, and biological processes of both the lake and drainage basin modify them. Water movement, wave action, and currents sort the particulate matter according to size and density, and the energy available for displacement. Results on the general gradient from coarser particles near the shore region to finer particles in sediment under deeper waters. Records will accumulate for centuries and with different speeds and in different time frames. When the slicing of a core up into thin layers of sediments, they will each represent a certain time interval in the history of the sampled lake. They can be analyzed for a range of variables. And finally, we're just going to look at what the whole paleolimnology study entails as a whole, the steps that are taken. So to review and summarize the important main steps involved with this approach, for some clarification, number 1 on the diagram represents lake sediments from past environmental conditions by receiving inputs from the aquatic system, terrestrial system, and atmosphere. These sediments can be dated as they're deposited layers, layer after layer, year after year. 2, present-day relationships are studied in a number of lakes to then infer past environmental conditions, often referred to as training or collaboration sets, across environmental gradients of interest. 3 are gravity cores that are used to retrieve surface samples. For example, the top is 0.5 to 1 centimeters of sediment, which are represented spatially and temporally integrated samples of the last few years of sediment accumulation. The samples are processed following standard techniques, and proxies are counted in each sample. 4, detailed information is noted about the lake, including morphology, sucky disk, temperature, pH, conductivity, and numerous water chemistry variables. 5 is long records are potentially retrieved from the lake which demonstrate environmental changes. 6, numerical analysis are then used to study the relationships between modern proxies and environmental data in order to infer past environmental conditions from fossil data. And 7 is environmental variables can then be inferred for thousands of years in the past and plotted to reconstruct past environmental change.
So, anthropogenic effects. Whereas anthropology is the study of humans and culture, when we look at anthropogenic effects, we are looking at the effect that humans have on something. When we look at anthropogenic effects on paleolimnology, we look at the past effect of humans on lakes. There are many different effects that humans have done. Almost everything people do has some sort of effect on the environment, and most of these things run off into some type of water system. So for sedimentation, this is one of the main anthropogenic effects. The paper that we focus on is for sedimentation deals with a lake system in Oregon. The paper deals with the many different effects that sedimentation has, and the 3 main anthropogenic effects that they focus on are road building, clear-cut logging, and slash burning. The report was originally conducted for there was much concern as to the effect these things were having on Oregon's salmon and trout populations. After the initial roads that were built, a very high level of sedimentation was found. The amount of sedimentation was found to be 109 times more than what was found in a control lake. Logging, when done well, can only produce a slight increase in sedimentation. However, when done without a plan, can increase sedimentation by incredible amounts. The article also talks about slash burning, which they did in the Pacific Northwest. The slash and burn method consists of clear cutting and then burning what is left to create fields. The problem with this regarding sedimentation was that it was found that sediment had been trapped in the logging debris and released once the burning had taken place. The report is based on 3 small watersheds in Oregon. The watersheds were monitored for 7 years before the cutting happened. Gauges were installed to measure the amount of sediment that each cut produced. After the clear cut, the forest was then burned, only leaving the upper part remaining unburned. There was then sediment sampling done every day. 2 things were studied in regards to the sedimentation: annual sediment load and suspended sediment concentration. All 3 aspects that were studied were shown to greatly increase sedimentation: road building, clear cutting, and slash burning. So for pollution, water pollution can be defined as a change in physical, chemical, or biological health in a water system that is caused by humans. The article we use primarily talks about lakes and the rivers that connect them. What caught the attention of the importance of pollution control was in 1969 when the Cuyahoga River caught on fire from being so polluted. We have damaged the Great Lakes in a number of ways: pesticides, heavy metals, agricultural runoff, air pollution, urbanization, toxic contamination, and sewage disposal. The lakes were subjected to years and years of being used as garbage cans. Although people started being more aware of the importance of water quality to health, things started changing. However, more and more industry was being established on the lakes. The lakes are polluted today because of 3 ways: point source, non-point source, and the atmospheric pollution. Point source pollution is when pollution enters through a specific point. The main culprits for point source pollution are from industrial discharges and sewage treatment plants. Non-point source pollution comes from many different sources. Since it comes from many small points, it is extremely difficult to control. This form of pollution is caused mainly by runoff from the agricultural sector and also runoff from cars and highways. Atmospheric pollution is technically a form of non-point source pollution. However, since it comes from air and not from runoff. The pollutants go through the hydrologic cycle and fall as rain into lakes. The most well-known form of atmospheric pollution is known as acid rain. The major sources of atmospheric pollution come from waste incinerators and coal-burning plants. Eutrophication is also caused from pollutants. Ever since the Europeans settled here, the amount of nutrients that have entered the Great Lakes has greatly increased. Eutrophication eventually kills off aquatic life, giving pollutant-tolerant species a chance to grow. This puts the balance of the lake completely altered. Hydroelectric dams. In a small community in Manitoba, hydroelectric dams were introduced starting in the 1900s. When the demand for energy went up, so did the amount of dams put in. Since there are many Aboriginal communities in Manitoba, their amount of food and products the land gives them is a lot. The flooding and the road building caused by the new dams influenced the land for them to hunt and harvest. The hydro dams decreased the quality of water. They also significantly decreased the fish populations. The dam also caused an increase of nutrients into the surrounding waters. This completely altered the lakes and affected all aspects of its health. The impact of the dams has overall negatively affected the communities surrounding them.
So one of the case studies we looked at was Clearwater Lake in Sudbury, and they compared the natural and human impacts over the last 150 years, and they looked at the different natural variability before and after industrialization. So some of the industrialization that has occurred in Sudbury over the past years include logging, agriculture, acidification, and metal deposition. The metal deposition is from the mines that have grown in Sudbury over the past 150 years. These industrialization methods played a negative role in the lakes around Sudbury, and to see how they will impact the future, researchers have to look into the past. Comparing both the human and natural impacts, such as forest fires and drought, the researchers were able to demonstrate the large amount of natural variability prior to anthropogenic influences and how they have changed over the years. And Clearwater Lake is in Sudbury, Ontario, and the increase of local acidification and human settlement has had many negative impacts on the lake. Acidification and metal deposits from forestry and mining businesses have left the lake with a shift in species and the loss of many species that used to live in the lake. Since it is hard to decipher how lakes were in the past, research today can give people a good idea of the characteristics of the lake history. For example, scientists can use particular taxa in the sediments to determine what environment they were deposited from. An algal group is a good example to be used as paleolimnological measure. Scientists can use diatoms to determine the features of the lake. Diatoms are unicellular eukaryotic algae of phlegm, and they are ubiquitous in aquatic environments including moss and soil. Since diatoms are primary producers, changes in their community have significant implications to the trophic structure and the aquatic environment of the lake. Relying on this knowledge, diatoms were used in the lake sediments to help figure out what watershed disturbances were in clear water before humans started to impact the lake. These results can be used to see how anthropogenic impacts affect the context of long-term aquatic community variation and look for further terrestrial aquatic system interactions. This will also show how the lake responded to disturbances from humans and allow remediation decisions for lakes close to the urban area. A core was used to obtain the sediment where 70 diatoms were found. Through the 70 diatoms, conclusions were made that the dominant species in the lake has been the same since the pre-industrial times. Most species were generalist species, which were hard to make decisions over since they have a high pH tolerance, along with species that were tolerant to high metal concentrations. The diversification in the lake also showed a decreasing pH value, therefore shifting towards acidic conditions, which will cause the occupation of new niches. This will also cause the lake to lean towards becoming unproductive and eventually oligotrophic. Many things have been done by the city to help bring back the lake to life, such as liming, fish stocking, and fertilization. These, however, have different success rates, and it is better to have let the ecosystem recover by itself than to try and intervene. Many regreening methods have been used on the lake to bring back its original state before industrialization, but in order to do that, it must first be known what these conditions were. This study shows that the diatom levels in the Sudbury community are within range of the natural levels before sediment, but are also increasing with shifts towards the acidic state. This can be due to vegetation change and the atmospheric acid deposition.